Hi, I'm Bill McNally. Welcome to America's Future. My guest, Mark Stewart, is visiting us again here in Windham. He is the 2016 Democrat candidate for the President of the United States. And we welcome him back again. We're going to talk some issues. Thank you, Mark, for coming back.
Well, thanks for having me.
Good. Okay, so, you know.
And I'll just correct one thing, though.
Oh.
I'm the non-liberal Democrat candidate.
All right. He says non-liberal. We'll go with that, and it's interesting. Now, in your writings and things, well, of course, you're Jewish,
Yeah.
a proud Jewish person, and you've incorporated this term in your cabinet called Sanhedrin. I guess we'll need an explanation.
Well, I think it's something that our government needs. The Sanhedrin was in ancient times the way the Jews who didn't have a formal state governed themselves. That was even before Christ. 70 elders, wise, to hear judgments and help govern, still loosely, not autocratically. We need a modern Sanhedrin. Not to impose any values on Americans. We define ourselves values-wise. But to be consulting government. Our government agencies are so vast and so darn powerful that we need responsible people, and I've named 500 candidates already. But I'd like 3 to lead this. The Sanhedrin would help us avoid things like, the VA scandal, the IRS scandal, the EPA porn-watching bureaucrats that don't get fired, whoever concocted Fast and Furious, whoever came behind giving $5 billion to get Bo Bergdahl, a traitor, back here. These things will not happen if Stewart has any part of the presidency. My Sanhedrin, which would be led, I hope, if Ben Carson is still free, Glenn Beck and George Will. George Will could be a Sanhedrin of his own. But I like 3 at a time for every position, and this would help govern my cabinet.
Okay, very good. And maybe we should just proceed into the issues. Well, first let me ask you, you're not well known, so what's the reality of getting well known in just 2 months?
Well, the reality has gotten helped by Donald Trump. And because here's a non-office holder who makes legitimate proposals for governing. And Mrs. Fiorina and Dr. Carson are 2 equally strong people who people respect irrespective of their government service. Maybe because they haven't been in government service. Media doesn't get it yet. But I think voters for 20 years have understood that an outsider might be a better help in governing. 20 years ago, Ross Perot was actually leading the race at this time before he pulled out on the independent side. 4 years ago, Herman Cain. He hadn't served in government. He was an unknown 5 months earlier. In November of 2011, he was the front runner. Dave Bratt unseated that minority House leader. We have a lot of voter sentiment for outsiders. Here's one who might deliver. So now you asked, look, how do you still get traction? I'm in literally the best place possible, New Hampshire, which has a very open primary. Now, yes, I'm one of 22 other Democrats that you haven't heard of on the ballot. But if there's ever an opening for somebody who's not a household name to inject himself in the Democrat Party primaries, it is Mark Stewart here and now. Because, Bill, I think Democrats need the choice. And I don't need to win New Hampshire. I need 7% of the votes, what I call a magnificent 7. Because, you know, on the Republican side, one guy's going to get 7% and continue. That's probably going to be 6th or 7th place on the Republican side. Whether that's Chris Christie or Rand Paul or Mike Huckabee, they're staying in the primaries. If I have even 5% here, 5%, I can continue credibly into Super Tuesday and the primaries beyond.
You know, I didn't mention in this show, but you know, I like to mention it, that you do have some nice New Hampshire roots. Mark Stewart is a graduate of Dartmouth College, and there's nothing wrong with that. Will you campaign outside of New Hampshire?
Oh, yeah. I have an appearance in Massachusetts. We're going to be in Boston. We're actually doing Lexington to Boston Harbor on Tea Party Day, December 16th. I and any voters who want to join us are welcome to meet on Lexington Green. We're going to march down Mass Avenue and the Bikeway to Harvard to just greet the Harvard football team. They shared with Dartmouth the title. Actually, there's a third candidate there too, and that's UPenn. So we had a three-way Ivy League title shared this time. So I have the Dartmouth signatures, not on this one, but an equivalent. I got the young men on the football team on their final day that they won the title. I've got a few Harvard football members going to meet me on Wednesday, and then hopefully we'll get some Penn men joining us. Trump will get them. He's a Penn alum. Anyway, we will be in Boston Harbor dumping tea, symbolically, and in a biodegradable fashion, don't worry. And there's a good chance that some progressive might dump me, but I'm willing to be swimming in the Charles for a few minutes.
Well, I guess it's time to get down to the issues, huh? Well, let's start. They're going to say, hey, let's talk about, what are you going to do? So let's start with the environment. And what do you want to say about, now, I myself personally, of course, it's just my thoughts that this environment or climate change is not man-made, but go ahead.
It's important, and it's too important to leave to just bureaucrats, especially bureaucrats that pay attention to certain scientists who have to lie, okay? There were a lot of British scientists in 2006 and 7 that felt the need to fake things about anthropomorphic climate change. I am not putting myself in one camp or the other. I will do this, though. I elevate the importance of the environment to the top 3 purposes of the federal government. You know, Bill, and I think your listeners do, that the federal government was not meant to do things like transportation, energy, agriculture. These were added a long time ago. I would like to see the government restricted to its real functions, and that is defense, courts, and I'm going to say environment. Now, environment would be a new topic to George Washington, but here is what an old thing. We individually have a property right. And I'm the only candidate who says this about the environment, that you and your kids and your grandkids each have a right to the air that you breathe, the water that you drink, the rain that's going to fall on people's crops. And I'm here to protect that. Here's the problem. Individuals really can't protect it. It's too, first off, indivisible. It's too hard for an individual to say, well, that big chemical company's polluting. So that's where we do need government to help ensure property rights in the environment are protected.
So are you going to have the government take care of this environment issue, or will it be privatized?
There are some private solutions that seem good. In the UK, northern UK, they're working with far less government to have tradable permissions. So they're not cutting emissions, but they are allowing factories to trade what they're allowed to do. I think the one that's been proposed in the US is a little too convoluted, but I think the concept is not bad. Real scientists, not politicians, scrutinized maybe by politicians saying, these are permissible. We can handle this level of parts per billion in our water, this level parts per billion in our air. And those companies who can do it more efficiently, cut those numbers, they get a gain because they can either trade off their extra emissions for money or they hold on to it and know that consumers are going to flock to them. You're environmentally good, I want to buy your stuff. It's what I call a consumer environmental revolt. And I believe in consumerism. It's part of my belief in democracy, small d, that we vote under capitalism with every purchase that we make. And an informed consumer can be the best voter, not just on November 9th or primary day, February 9th in New Hampshire. They vote every week when they go to certain supermarkets over others, where they buy certain stuff online instead of others. More information that millions of us take advantage of is the best kind of democracy.
Well, Mark, you know that we've heard the other candidates. I haven't heard one candidate talk, or maybe there was one, I'm not sure, about abolishing any of these departments. I mean, you know that the United States is not in the business of producing energy. It's not their job. It's not in the Constitution. And then we've got the Department of Agriculture and the Department of this and the Department of that. These are these behemoth organizations. Is there anything that's going to be abolished?
I bring all of those down dramatically. I'm not sure we need to abolish, but it would be extremely small. Thomas Jefferson ran his State Department with all of 5 people. Our Agriculture Department might be slim to 50. Okay? It is possible that we do more good for agriculture by getting those bureaucrats back on the farm or back in distribution instead of cooped up in Washington doing political favors for people.
Well, then let's talk about immigration. That's a real hot issue, as we know. So what are your thoughts on that?
I, in one way, go further than Trump. And it's my reasoning for deporting almost everybody. The reason that Trump has yet to say is that we're diluting our culture. And I'm a defender of the American culture because the Judeo-Christian culture as practiced in America has been good for the world, not just for us. We've influenced the world for the better. When after 1945, we were able to help civilize some backward places, help reform places that had been our enemies, Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan, we helped them become great countries now. Germany is the best country in Europe. Japan's the best country in Asia. Thanks to us, or at least an ethic that Americans have had, and I fear losing it. The immigrants today that are coming over illegally have almost no interest in Americana. We're just a place to live. We're just a place maybe to worship their way. They're not interested in the way my grandparents were. My grandfather came in 1916. He wanted to learn English. He wanted to be part of Americana as much as possible. When we can get that kind of immigrant, and I'm in favor of more legal immigration, let's wait 2 to 5 years, get our act together, and then hopefully we have better legal immigration because we have no more illegals. I would be turning back people, not at the border necessarily, but if you get in and you start using our services, we know who you are, plan to have a bus back in a few months. We know who you are if you're using our schools. We know who you are if you're using our post office. We know who you are if you're using our hospitals. And though we'll cure you for a medical emergency, you're going back to Guatemala or you're going back to China because this country should not be absorbing illegals in the first place. That ends our sovereignty, and I really fear a dilution of our culture.
Well, you know, I'm going to put a plug in here for my organization, which is based right here in Windham, New Hampshire. It's the Samuel L. Blumenfeld Literacy Foundation, and Sam Blumenfeld contributed so much to English, to teach people to read English, to speak English, and to write it, cursive writing, arithmetic, and all that. So where do you stand in the education field, let's say, as versus English and second languages? And give us some thoughts on that.
This should be an easy call. Every student should be immersed in English, not just slowly given a little extra coursework, immersed, so that you can take part side by side with your American-born brethren. You'll have to work harder initially. Yes, if you didn't know English when you were growing up in Panama, you're going to have to work a little bit harder. Don't be afraid of hard work. And my political progressive party, that's the Democrat Party leadership now, is so afraid for something that might cause discomfort. What do they do in the schools? The progressives are the one that say, well, we'd like bilingual education. Bilingual education might sound nice. It's evil. It is evil to inflict on a Latino student an inability to earn a really good career. Who can earn, if they don't speak English well, more than $100,000 a year? Maybe a star athlete. That's about it. If you're in Miami's Cuban community, maybe you can be a good salesperson and not speak English. But outside of that, you are crippled. And the educators in the progressive movement of this Democrat Party that I'm still part of, by the way, I call myself an IED, increasingly embarrassed Democrat, embarrassed by my leadership, that they won't think about the consequences of feel-good things like bilingual education instead of do-good things like immersion.
Right. Yeah, education is going to be a top issue because we are placing 17th in the nations. Our SAT scores are going down. Something has to be happening over there, and of course we'll get to that at some other times. But let's talk about taxes now. This tax system is just out of control.
It's decrepit, and in a way, it's immoral. I'll get to the moral argument for my proposal next. But what is my proposal? For citizens, we should have zero income tax. I think the revenue should be replaced by a combination of sales taxes and wealth tax. Now, wealth, you need a constitutional amendment. We did that 100 years ago. That's how we got the income tax in the first place. Remember, the income tax was never meant to apply to tons of people in a big oppressive way. It was to extract a little revenue for what was called progressive proposals back then. It's been utilized by Congress after Congress to prey on people who don't have political power. The tax code is so gargantuan, so intricate, and so malleable by political forces that when Pfizer wants to get something for its drug company, it goes to Congress and works on its bureaucrats or maybe the reps themselves, and we end up with a porous tax code that is absolutely unfair to average Americans. We should abolish it. I would keep the tax code on non-citizens. But for citizens, I think the income tax should be zero. Where does the revenue come from? Federal sales tax. It's relatively efficient to collect. And I think a wealth tax, okay? That's something that I'd like to pose for a referendum in the next 4 or 5 years, that we really think whether taxing wealth, real property, and vessels. So cars, boats, real property. We know where they are. We know how easily we can tax, and we know the value. It seems like an easy way to extract revenue.
Okay, how about after the tax situation has been corrected, let's say.
You're optimistic.
I know it's going to be tough.
Well, I'll tell you the toughest part. The toughest part is to have a fair, there's the F word, a fair downsizing. That from what might be now the expectations, well, I planned with ERISA law and I have a 401k and it's all tied to the tax code. We can't immediately abolish. There needs to be a phase out. And one of the cabinet departments that I have created, I think it's a very important one because it's going to be where the action is. If I'm elected, the next 3 or 4 years will be, how do you downsize? How do you phase out? And if you want to see who my #1 person to run that, it's Rand Paul.
Interesting. I was going to ask you here about the Federal Reserve.
Well, I don't know too much about the intricacies, but I do know the effect. Over the last 9 or 10 years, it's been terrible for Americans that don't earn very much. The low interest, deliberately low interest that Bernanke and now Yellen have set with Obama's approval, that has caused good stock market gains. That's nice for some pension funds and some well-heeled people. It's terrible for the middle class because now you can't earn money in CDs like you used to. You get 1%, okay? You can't save that way. And you fall behind these people who see the Dow going up and the S&P going back to highs from before. The Federal Reserve, I'm not sure is even necessary, okay? They put in the Federal Reserve 100 years ago. Why? To protect against recessions. Recessions weren't all that bad. You know capitalism. Capitalism builds itself better with recessions that cause some contractions, more people get laid off, prices fall, and then at some point, people want to buy the inexpensive stuff. People want to hire the laborer who's willing to work for a little less but has a job. Recessions in the 19th century lasted less than 2 years. In 1907, we had a 6-month recession. Ooh! But what happened was there were calls by progressives then for, well, we shouldn't even have that. we're going to make a Federal Reserve, and they met Jekyll Island. That was your reminder to me, to come up with a quasi-government and involve private banks that would supposedly cushion against recession. Bill, did it work?
No.
The first time they had an opportunity, 1929, it was terrible. They made a terrible move by constricting the money supply instead of increasing it. We didn't get out of that recession for 10 years. What brought us out? It wasn't even federal policy. It was, or Federal Reserve policy. It was wartime buildup. It was a peacetime draft that got a lot of men into uniform instead of on the unemployment lines. It was also a command of, we're going to use more factories to make rubber for our tanks and clothing for our potential use of troops.
Yes, and they said that the Federal Reserve has not met its objectives. You know, when, in the original founding, they were going to do this, stop maybe inflation, and the problem is they're creating inflation. As I see it, if money has no value, in other words, the dollar in your pocket is a Federal Reserve note, you can't redeem it in anything, then what's to stop them from just keep printing it and printing it? You don't. That's why I feel that the income tax hasn't been really increased all that much. The money can be printed, you see. And
since the Federal Reserve was imposed, the value of the dollar has gone down 93%.
So I don't believe in an audit. I know that Rand Paul is suggesting an audit, but I believe G. Edward Griffin said no. You can't. You have to abolish it, not audit it, and just get back to sound money. We have the Constitution, and it says that money must be backed by gold and silver. Seems like a simple proposition, because if you have to mine gold and mine silver, then it's going to have value. But if you have to print paper and call that a dollar, yeah. You see?
We did fine
it's
for
a hidden
130 years without the Federal Reserve.
It's a hidden tax. Inflation is a hidden tax. Drives the prices up, and that's what inflation is. It's not it's an increase in the quantity of money. The prices are going up because the feds are shoving money in. It's like two people at an auction. If you and I were at an auction, we were going to bid on some products, and some guy comes in and hands us a suitcase full of money. What's that going to do to the bidding price? Because we didn't get it. Well, what about, I guess we'll get back to some, maybe some homegrown questions here. What events are you going to be doing in New Hampshire in the coming weeks?
Well, I've been invited to an anti-pipeline event. I'm not sure exactly when it is, but let me say why I am against the New Hampshire pipeline. It's not the science of whether it will protect the environment or hurt it. It's not the economics of whether it'll create jobs or not. It's the fact that the proposed pipeline uses eminent domain, and I am against it. We should not be using the power of government to take property away. And on a national level, that's the one reason why I'm against the Keystone Pipeline. They want to use government to take land from landowners. If you've got a good enough reason or a big enough wallet to buy these people out, fine. You have no opposition from me. But I will not let the Fifth Amendment be traduced by big corporations commingling with government to try to use eminent domain. I'm from the state that had the worst Supreme Court decision in my lifetime, Kelo. Kelo versus New London was a Fifth Amendment tragedy, and it cannot be used over and over and over again.
Well, Mark, it's been a pleasure having you again. I'm going to let you address the audience in that camera right there.
Well, I'd like to then address the young audience.
All right, go ahead.
The students and just beyond students who right now may not be as engaged as you should be, in part because the federal government and most bureaucratic councils at the local level, they don't pay attention to you. In part, it's your fault. You don't pay attention to what's going on. My campaign stands for paying attention to your leaders. If your city council has been promising these things over and over and over again and not delivering, vote them out. If Congress, though they have a 97% retrieval rate, vote them out because they haven't done their job. They've put us $19 trillion, and that's the tip of the iceberg, because you know it's a lot higher than that if you include Medicaid, Medicare, Part D. You are the ones who could stop the sellouts in Congress and not have a 97% return rate. I would return one guy, Justin Amash. He's good. The rest of the U.S. House, I think, could be overturned. And I have a way that not only your vote could help, it's called the resistance. And I would love to have you look at weresist.us, because after this campaign, whether I make it to high office or not, students and youngsters especially should become candidates. You can punk the incumbent who's not serving you well. That's what I founded the resistance for. It will live on no matter how far or how little I go here. Thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Well, thank you, Mark Stewart, and thank you, the Windham Cable Studio here, for offering this opportunity to address the public. If you want to reach Mark Stewart, you can do that at www.stewartforliberty.com. Thanks again, Mark, and I wish you the best of luck in this campaign.
Thank you very much.
Right.